Producing and writing for network television. It's a pretty high-level art form. There's not very many people that are really core to doing that at the network level. Today, we're going to talk a little bit with Dean Batali about how to be a successful writer and a producer at the network television level. And remember, it's not just a digital world we live in. Network television is still a powerful tool, and millions of people can be influenced by a network television show. So stay tuned. It's going to be an incredible time. Dean Batali is a network television writer and producer. Welcome to the episode today.
To be here.
Appreciate
Good to
it.
see you.
You have done That 70s Show, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Good Witch, Ties That Bind. You did a Chonda Pierce TV movie, right?
I did a DVD for her, yeah.
Woohoo! And Nazareth, which was a TV movie.
That's right. And then I did a show called Puppy Dog Pals for Disney Junior, an animated show.
Man, you've done the gamut.
I've done the gamut,
And
yes.
he's written a book, Watching TV Religiously. I'd encourage you to check this out. He wrote it with Kutter Callaway. It's a terrific book about really understanding television and theology and dialogue. It's a terrific book.
Only one
I'd
of its
encourage you
kind.
to get it. Yeah, one at a time.
Yeah, turn off the TV and read the book.
So, you've had a long career in network television.
Yeah, mostly network, yeah.
How did you open the door? Talk to me about breaking through.
Yeah, so I came down here. I grew up in the Seattle area. I worked for, I did theater up in the Seattle area, was a playwright, wrote musicals.
Really?
Worked for a theater company in
So
Seattle.
wait a minute, go back. When did you first realize writing was what you did?
You know, it wasn't until college.
Really?
I was a child of television.
Okay.
Like when I was 13 or 14 years old, I remember writing a sample script for the TV show Taxi. I don't know why, but I just sort of started doing it.
Yeah.
And then I did a lot of theater in high school as an actor, as a singer, as a performer. And then in college, I decided to try to write a musical.
Oh.
Just because I looked around, it was a musical about Noah, and I looked around at church musicals and thought, these really are awful.
Terrible.
Why isn't somebody writing funny comedy stuff? So that's when I started. I wasn't like, oh, I always wanted to write, but I had written some music at that time, and then I went to the Evergreen State College, a small liberal arts college in Olympia, Washington, and wrote this musical about Noah, and it worked. And then I wrote some more stuff, some one acts that we toured around to churches and other places.
Yeah.
And then got hired by a theater company in Seattle called Taproot, which as an actor, my wife and I got hired as actors and I as a writer.
Really?
So we were doing like 8 shows a week. We'd show up at schools and set up in the gymnasium and put on an anti-drug show. As you can tell by the drug use in America, we were really effective, weren't we?
Yes. You solved the problem.
That's right. And then we did shows in churches as well. So I wrote a show for them, and then they fired me. So I moved to LA.
Perfect.
Yes.
Perfect.
Yes.
So why the decision to move? Was it a big cataclysmic thing?
It was pretty kind of out of the blue, kind of one of those creative differences moments where we had thought we'd be there forever. This is what I wanted to do, work for this company or companies like at writing theater. Theater's still what is most in my heart. Hollywood had been in the back of my mind, and I thought, well, I'm writing shows that people are laughing at. I'd written 4 or 5 shows by then. So I figured out I knew I could write a joke, and if I thought it was funny, most of the audience was going to think it was funny. I'm not always right. But it was working, so we were thinking maybe New York, maybe Florida, in that kind of Orlando area, maybe Hollywood, and we didn't know anybody here, but we had $2,000 in a U-Haul truck and came down here, and that was 28 years ago now.
Wow! And so, what was your first? How did you get into the business once you got here?
Yeah, so we didn't know anybody here, but those were the days where you'd literally drive your resume around town and drop them on people's desks.
Yes.
And my wife and I were doing that.
Pre-internet.
That's correct, yeah. And my resume got on the right desk, and I got a job in the mail room at CBS Radford Studios. It was actually CBS MTM at the time.
That's the iconic classic
It
story,
is.
mail room.
And as a TV writer, so at the time they were doing, it was nothing but TV there. They had done all the MTM shows there, Mary Tyler Moore and Hill Street. They were doing Roseanne and A Different World and 30-something, and I put the name up on the door that said Seinfeld. So I met nothing but TV writers. And I always wondered if I hadn't got my first job there, if I would have gotten all these connections in television.
So how did you broach the subject? I mean, did you just say, hey, by the way, I write?
You know what's weird is I never had to ask anybody to read my script in Hollywood.
Really?
And I still think that's true today, that most people I know, somebody will offer to read your script if you're not a jerk, if you're not obnoxious. And I can, with a lot of effort, I can come across as not being a jerk and not being obnoxious. and actually being interested in people. And they were really kind. They'd all ask, what do you want to do? And I said, I want to be a sitcom writer. And because specifically I would say sitcom writer, they'd go, oh, well, I'd love to read your script, or there's a show hiring over here that needs a PA. So I always tell people, like, when they come to town, the more they know what they want to do, the better, because people will start thinking of you as that thing. You can still kind of figure it out. But I'll hear a lot of people who say, I want to be in production. I'm going, what does that mean? I met a woman at a conference, a 21-year-old Korean woman who's going to school at Urbana, I think, and she said, I want to be a line producer. Like, she already knows that's what she wants to do. So I already know kind of to think of her in that way.
Well, I wrote a book years ago called One Big Thing, Discovering What You're Born to Do. And the whole premise of the book was figure out that niche. Know it early, because I tell young directors, if you want to come to Hollywood and be a director, that means you're competing with everybody. Tarantino, Spielberg, everybody. But if maybe you want to start with directing horror films or comedy or something, become the best at that.
Figure out what you're aiming at. And I have just found that most people in Hollywood are really kind of eager to help you, or at least kind of mentor you. Or I often say that I like to mentor young writers because I want them to hire me as I get older and older.
Right.
But yeah, the people at that time just started thinking of me in that direction, and then that mailroom job led to PA jobs, writer's assistant jobs, where I got in the room taking notes, and eventually as more people read my scripts, I eventually got on to a
Now
staff.
go back one more time to the not being a jerk part. Because there is a certain number of people that become jerk, well-intentioned, they mean well, but they're either pushing too hard, they're being obnoxious. I met someone recently that literally, he came over, we had an interview with him, we talked. I said goodbye. He walked away. Literally, I don't think he had gotten to the end of the street before he called me on the cell phone to ask me how it was, what I thought. And I thought, give me some time. So that's important, right?
You know, here's a story I've told a lot before, but I was working on a show with Julie Andrews. It was a sitcom called Julie, and we used to deliver scripts around town by hand in those days. And I remember delivering a script to her house at like 10:30 at night. She came to the door in her bathrobe, and I hand her a script, and I say, here's tomorrow's script, Julie. And she goes, oh, thank you, Dean, sleep well. So Mary Poppins told me to sleep well that night. I slept pretty well that night. But on that show, I noticed that the writers, it was my job to go to the store every morning, get bagels and cereal and candy for the writers. So I kind of figured out what they liked, and I noticed that they really liked Fruit Loops. And I always kept an extra box of Fruit Loops in the cupboard. And one day a writer came in, and he finished off a box of Fruit Loops, only like half full his bowl, and he looked at me really sadly and said, Dean, we're out of Fruit Loops. And I said, no, we're not. And I reached into the cupboard and I grabbed a box and I handed it to him, and he looked like I was handing him a toilet seat made of gold, you know? And I'm convinced if it were not for that moment, I wouldn't be here as a successful writer. And I'm serious, because I think he noticed, hey, if Dean is aware enough to know our needs, that we like Fruit Loops, maybe I can invite him into the room. He can help hold the pencil while we're breaking stories. He can sort of help us out. And so I always say, you know, it's if you want to be great in the kingdom of Hollywood, learn to be a servant of all. Now that doesn't come naturally to me, but kind of figuring out other people's needs. And by the way, now that I'm a showrunner, it's still the same thing. Noticing what my crew needs at a time. It's that skill that just kind of, some of us have to force ourselves to be servants. But I think that's what it was. Even when I was in the mailroom, I would just have this kind of, well, let me, you know, sure, I can bring you those stamps, just going that slightly extra mile. Keeping the coffee pot full, if that's your job, to keep the coffee pot full. So it's those little kinds of things.
That's worth writing down, by the way. Worth writing down. You know, when I was a cameraman on a network show years ago, and I really wanted to direct so badly. And I never met the director, Matt Connolly. I'll never forget. Matt Connolly was the name, and I wanted to meet Matt. And one day he's standing at the craft service table. And I had done my homework, like you'd done. And I learned that he had a daughter in medical school. And everybody else all day long hits up Matt about lighting issues and wardrobe issues and script issues. And I thought, maybe I should talk to him about something personal. So I walked up to him, craft service table, introduced myself, said, Matt, I heard you have a daughter in medical school. Man, he lit up. He started talking about her. In fact, we talked for so long, he looked at his watch and said, you know, we pretty much got a call the day. He said, would you mind coming to dinner with me? I'd love to continue the conversation. I go to dinner with Matt. Guess what? I become his next assistant director. And then eventually, he left the show. I took his place. But
how did you know at that time his daughter was in medical school? Because this was pre-internet.
I did. Well, I asked around.
But you know,
I asked around.
It still is amazing. You know, with the internet now, the fact you cannot go into any meeting not knowing stuff about people.
That is
I
so
always
true.
check Facebook to see if we have mutual friends. I check LinkedIn to see if there's any connection there, and just knowing their credits and to be able to go in. I went on a meeting once and I had just seen this woman in a documentary about Saturday Night Live or something, and we talked about it. And at the end, she said, it's so cool that you knew who I was. It's like, you it's that affirmation that we're all looking for.
Oh,
so that's really key now, I think, is going in. And even when I was in the mailroom and I'd meet these writers and I'd kind of figure out what other shows that I'd worked on, and I'd talk to them about that. And not try to be too much of a super fan.
Oh, but it does make
but people like to be affirmed.
And it even works on a little higher level. I know people idiots that didn't do their homework and went and pitched a horror script to a family movie company. Or pitched a family movie to a horror company. I mean, it immediately sets you up as being an idiot.
Right.
And nobody wants to deal with that guy. So just a little practical things, I think, make a bigger difference than people think.
And it pays off.
So, all right, get to the actual first script. How did you bridge from being Fruit Loops guy to actually the first script?
So I was writing with a partner at the time. I met another assistant. We were both working on a show. I was working for the people who had run Cheers for 7 years and won Emmys for doing that. So I knew of them, and we were working on the third Bob Newhart show. This is in the mid-90s. We liked each other's writing, so we started writing together. We passed our scripts around, and people liked it. It was a Simpsons spec. In those days, we were writing spec scripts rather than pilots. Most TV writers now are breaking in writing pilots. I still think people should write specs just to learn. A lot of schools don't even teach spec writing. I still think it's the necessary step before writing a pilot, because everything that can go wrong with a pilot will. So I still say to write a spec or two before you write a pilot.
And a spec also makes them think you've done your homework on their show, you know what it's about.
And we know when I'm hiring somebody, like when I'm hiring for comedy, I want to read like Kimmy Schmidt's or 30 Rock's, or I just want to know, can people write this style of comedy that I like rather than some brand new thing. Look, our scripts got into the right people's hands at the right time. Another writer read it. They had just been offered a show called a script for a show called Duckman, which was with Jason Alexander. They handed it off to the showrunners, and suddenly the showrunner's calling me from a gas station saying, "I want you to come in and write." Then we got an agent through another writer who set us up at CAA, and they sent our scripts around, and we wrote a couple of episodes for a show called The Adventures of Pete and Pete. And then the Northridge earthquake happened, and one of the writers I was working for was up in Santa Barbara, and she was kind of freaking out trying to get a hold of her family, and her 5-year-old was really antsy and needed something to read, and this executive producer had our script in her briefcase, so she handed it to her 5-year-old daughter, and the 5-year-old daughter started reading it and going, "This is funny, Mommy," so that writer finally read it and then hired us on her show.
Really?
So it was a combination of those things. Yeah, it was kind of all happening at the same time.
Reading Ed, I'm embarrassed it's taken me so long, but I'm reading Ed Catmull's book, who's the president of Pixar, Creativity Incorporated. And he talks about those random things, and they're significant. He said that he listed a number of random things that had really contributed to their success. He said, never think that, I've never thought it was because of my genius or John Lasseter or the other guys. He said there's always incredible random things. You should always be ready to respond.
Well, it is because of my genius, so I will say that.
Of course, obviously.
No, but I always say it's talent, access, and opportunity. Everybody says it's who you know, but you got to have the skills. I think it's 75% that. You got to be able to sing. There is timing, there is a little of who you know, but even in my story, it's like my resume got on the right desk, the earthquake happened, I met the right person when I was an assistant. I still wonder if I would be successful if it weren't for that mailroom job, because that opened so many doors, got me into so many different places.
Another thing that I think is worth mentioning is, by that time, you had a library of scripts you had written.
You know, it was not until my 7th spec script, which was the Simpsons spec that I wrote with my partner Rob, because I had written 3 or 4 on my own, 2 or 3 with somebody else, and then 2 others with Rob. So it wasn't until my 7th script that it was the one that broke through, that made the difference.
And before that, you had done theater.
I had done plays,
You had done plays, musicals?
I had done 4 or 5 hours worth of material that I had put in front of people, so I knew whether it was interesting or not. So I had made stuff without, in today's world, I'd probably do a web series, although I still might just, rent a theater and put on a show. A lot of churchgoers, I say, we have a captive audience every Sunday for announcements and things. People are always looking for shows to do.
Well, I bring it up because one of my big beefs out here is people that want to be a writer but haven't actually written anything. And David McFadzean, who you know, told me a long time ago, and I'm sure you've heard it too, his when after doing Roseanne and Home Improvement and then doing movies, he got inundated with so many scripts. He started doing this. He said he came up with this idea of, you send me 10 of your best, 10 scripts. You tell me the one you want to evaluate, and I promise you I'll read it and evaluate. I don't think he's ever had anybody take him up on it. I don't think he's ever. And these are people that say they want to be writers, but they don't even have 10 scripts to show for it.
There's Malcolm Gladwell's 10,000 hour rule, and I've tried to translate it to writing, and I think it's 1,000 pages. I think until you've written 1,000 pages,
that's interesting.
which is 5. And I'll even count your rewrites.
Yeah,
so,
okay.
if you've written 5 scripts that you've rewritten a couple times, that's 500 pages times 2. If you've written 5 or 6 TV scripts, I think you got to think on those levels of how long it takes. And I look back at my early stuff, and it's not very good. I look back at something I wrote yesterday; it's not very good. But I start to see how I got better.
Well, I'm convinced that particularly in an industry like this, creativity is not a moment of brilliant inspiration when you come up with a life-changing thing. It's long plodding, throwing out, ripping out pages, starting over.
I get asked about writer's block a lot, and I don't think I ever really had it when I was younger, kind of trying to break in. When I was running Good Witch, I had to do 24 episodes over 2 years, and I ended up writing every word that hit the screen.
Wow.
And each script was about 65 pages long, and sometimes I'd have to rewrite them almost completely in about a day and a half. So it basically, almost as fast as the words can come, they would hit the page and then they go on the screen. And they weren't always good, but I still feel that made me a better writer, just having to force through with the deadlines, which is one of the great things about being a professional writer, is you have deadlines, you have to deliver. 70 Show just had to be ready every Friday night at 7 because that's when the audience is showing up.
Interesting. Same
with Buffy, the cameras are going to roll, so it just kind of forces you to say, you know what, it's good enough. I actually believe good enough is sometimes good enough. It's as good as you can make it. I think Michelangelo had a deadline for the Sistine Chapel. It had to be done. The Messiah was going to get sung, whether Handel was done with it or not. So I just compared myself to Michelangelo.
That was impressive.
Handel, But anyway, I just think you got to get it done.
Well, advertising legend David Ogilvy said it's not creative unless it sells.
That's right,
And what is it? Steve Jobs said it has to ship. If it doesn't ship, what's the point? So I do think that, I talk a lot about what I call practical creativity. If you want to be a landscape watercolorist, great. Sit on your back porch and wait till the inspiration hits. However, if you want to work in Hollywood or advertising or most other industries, you've got to hit a deadline. And the thing about television is it's weekly. I mean, you have to crank it out.
And that's why young writers, get into a writer's group or just somehow figure out how to make sure you hit your deadlines and then move on from scripts. So many people will just continue to polish and polish and polish. And I hear Antoine Fisher did like 47 drafts of his movie Antoine Fisher, and he might have. That's great. I've always been curious to see the difference between 45 and 46. But for television writers, even young screenplay writers, just get your first 2 or 3 scripts out because they're not going to be very good. Accept the fact they're not going to be good. Don't overwrite them. Don't over-rewrite them. I mean, just kind of be done with them. Yes, do 2 or 3, 4 drafts. Get them as good as you can, but then say that's it, and then move on. Maybe go back to it years later. That was kind of the benefit of when I was working with my partner, Rob. We would just be churning out 2 or 3 spec scripts a year. Even when we were working after Buffy, we wrote a King of the Hill spec script, and that got us onto that 70s show. We just wanted new material out there.
I actually had a guy send me a script a number of years ago that it was the dawn. It was Genesis to Revelation, the history of the world, and I had so many problems. But I said, you might want to change some of this stuff. He said, no, God gave this to me word for word, and I'm not changing a thing. And I said, well, I'm not going to be the guy that produces it. And this idea that everything you write is sacred. And when I wrote my last book, The Way Back, I pretty much threw out a full book in the process. I wrote twice as much as I needed to, but it's that paring down, at least for me. There's a quote about, I think it was Flannery O'Connor said, I don't know what I'm thinking till I see what I say.
Right.
You got to get it on paper, then start working with it.
And writing is rewriting and all that. And that's especially in television is true. I learned early on as a playwright, if the scene wasn't working in front of the audience or with the cast, it just had to be rewritten. So I had to learn to separate myself from the work. And you know this, when we mentor younger writers, some people take it so personally when we just don't like a scene or don't like a script. You got to be able to write your stuff, set it out there, and let people evaluate it as if you didn't write it. And that was really key early on, still is.
All right, in the next episode, we want to talk about being in the writer's room. I want to talk to him about actually the practical aspects of writing dramatic television programming. But before we go, give me, if there was one thing, if there was somebody out there that really wanted to come to Hollywood, what's the one thing you'd tell them? Encourage them, maybe discourage them? What would you say that they need to know before they ever show up in LA?
Yeah, I say that you have to be ready for a lot of rejection. And that's what I didn't really realize, especially now till later in my career. When last 12 years, I think I've only been employed 5 or 6 years out of those 12 when you kind of mixed it up. And
Wow.
You know, I say to people, think of every job interview you went on but didn't get it, or every date you wanted to go on, or every time you didn't get picked for a team or elected in grade school, and multiply that kind of rejection times every single day. And you just got to be kind of ready for that. It's a volatile career. It's generally a freelance career.
Yes.
We hear about all these people that have full-time jobs. I was very lucky on 70 Show to work for 7 years on this one show. That's really rare in television. Mostly you're going from job to job to job. So kind of get ready, be ready for that, but just know that you got to keep producing. So you have to be a self-starter. You have to be able to produce material, but kind of be ready for that struggle of rejection. And you know, I came to television because I wanted to see my own kind of shows on TV. Specifically, I wanted to see Christian characters on TV. I have had zero success.
That weren't pedophiles.
That's right. Correct. Yeah. People of depth.
Yeah.
And I've had zero success doing that. So me, you know, I've been on the Writers Guild 22 years, but by my own measure, I've been a failure in doing what I came here to do. I've had other great success. I'm not discounting that. But I just think you have to be ready to kind of shift your dreams, shift your want, kind of follow the market. Be ready to be disappointed a lot.
Well, I'm certainly not what I thought I'd be doing at this point in my career back when I was in college. And I have had dramatic shifts and changes in my career.
But you're interviewing me. Wasn't that one of your life
Well,
goals?
it was the big one.
Right,
so I've achieved that.
Yes.
I've achieved that. There. So listen, thanks for tuning in. And we'll be back on the next episode to talk more with Dean about how to be a success in Hollywood and how to do the writing thing. But before you go, remember, talk to us, share this with your friends. If you have somebody that wants to come to Hollywood, you have a creative friend that needs to hear this, please share it. Give us a rating. Give us a rating. It'll help us move up and more people will get to see it. By the way, join us at philcooke.com. That's where I write about all this stuff. That's Cook with an E. I write about the intersection of faith, media, and culture. And by the way, if you haven't gotten your unique creative planner, you need to get it right now. You can order it at uniquecreativeplanner.com. People are really excited about it. Here, I'll give you one. Congratulations.
I can't wait.
You get swag for being on the
You know, it was worth the trip.
It's worth the trip, no question about it. Stay tuned. We'll be back with more from Dean in our next episode.